Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Premier Kenney, a couple things. Time is limited, so I hope if you go yes or no on some of these things. Did killing the Keystone XL pipeline make it more difficult and expensive to move Canadian oil to U.S. refineries?
Yes.
So now Canadian oil, which would have traveled by pipe, will have to be moved by train or truck. Is this more or less environmentally friendly?
Less.
Has killing the pipeline further exacerbated the supply chain issues between our two countries?
Yes.
And so is it fair to say that President Biden's decision to kill the Keystone pipeline increased cost, harmed the environment, and added to our supply chain troubles?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion.
So you noted in your testimony that Keystone would have been able to move 830,000 barrels a day Canadian oil, significantly more than the 670,000 barrels a day of oil we imported from Russia in 2021. So if Keystone had been built, would Canada have been able to replace that Russian oil?
Oh, yes. And in fact, the operator, TC Energy, had contracts to move that 800,000 barrels plus per day.
So in your testimony, you note that President Biden has pleaded with OPEC and Russia to increase oil output and has worked to remove sanctions on oil exports from Venezuela and Iran. At the same time, the administration continues to block access to energy resources and the infrastructure needed to move them in Alberta and across the U.S., including in my home state of Wyoming. So I was just going to point out today's Wall Street Journal had today, Tuesday, May 17th, Biden's dance with the dictator states, the Biden administration's sanctions dance with the dictator, and they're talking, of course, here about Venezuela's strongman Maduro, dance with the dictator is taking place even as it acts at every turn to restrict U.S. oil and production. So does Biden's policy make any sense for the people of the United States or of Canada?
Well, it's for you to figure out what works for people of the United States, Senator, but I'll just say this. We find it inexplicable that the government of the United States has been more focused on encouraging additional OPEC production than Canadian production.
So, I understand that provinces, rather than the federal Canadian government, takes the lead on permitting many energy projects. So there's some differences in how we do things. Provinces largely own and have the authority to manage the natural resources within their borders. Your staff behind are shaking their head yes across the board. Provinces largely own and have the authority. So in Wyoming and other western states, the federal government owns and manages nearly 70% of the minerals within our state borders. This makes for a very inefficient system. So could you explain to all of us how do provinces, rather than the federal government, make better managers of natural resources?
Well, that is a great question because, Senator, we've developed over, really since 1947, when the first major oil discovery was found in Alberta, we've developed huge expertise, technical expertise, regulatory expertise, policy expertise in oil and gas production. And so I think it's fitting that our Constitution gives exclusive authority to the provinces over the regulation of the production of natural resources. And I want to thank the Government of Canada for having recognized that in having signed what we call equivalency agreements with Alberta over issues like the regulation of major greenhouse gas emissions, industrial emissions, as well as methane. Because frankly, we're on the ground, we have the technical expertise, much more so than frankly, bureaucrats in Ottawa would have.
Well, when you were here, I texted with the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he responds back, told him you were here. He said, Kenny is very strong. He was one of my best ministers, so thank you very much for being here. Mr. Bradley, roughly 60% of Canada's electricity comes from hydropower, another 20% from nuclear power. Canada appears to be making the most of its God-given natural energy resources. The United States is blessed with major natural gas amounts, coal, renewable sources as well. Do you believe in an all-of-the-above energy strategy that capitalizes on abundant, reliable, and affordable natural resources to keep the lights on?
Senator, thank you for that question. Yes, at Electricity Canada, particularly in the context of our expectations with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are and have continued to advocate for an all-of-the-above approach for all types of non-emitting electricity in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.